Hi, welcome back to the Custom Model Guy, and this is the next edition of the custom Mustang build. This episode we'll be looking at the chassis, finishing off the painting and the final assembly of that section. As always, I started off with snipping the parts out of the sprue and then gave them a general clean up. And we move on with some Zero Paint's grey primer. Starting off with the main chassis piece itself. I started out with a light coat and then a second coat went on, which was a little bit more generous. All the major pieces got some primer, although I didn't show the entire lot because it's just incredibly boring. And then we moved on to some gloss black with Zero Paints. Now I'm using this as a matte black rather than using it with a clear coat, and it leaves the texture a little bit like a powder coat, a bit of a rough feel to it. This was just applied along the side seams and the rear sections. And now some Tamiya semi-gloss black for the rest of the suspension parts. And then I used some Vallejo gun grey on the main central drive shaft. I found this actual underside shot of a Mustang, so I tried to recreate this as much as possible. For the goldy yellow section I used some Tamiya Titan Gold and then some metallic brown for the fuel tank at the rear. Unfortunately I lost the footage for this because I forgot to press record. There's the actual final piece, and now I'm just adding in some Vallejo matte black on some of the rear sections. I've sped this up for you. And then it was time for some detail on that, so I used some Vallejo chrome and a sharpened cocktail stick to add some colour in on the pipework, the little feeder tubes and things like that on the fuel tank. Again, trying to match that sample picture as best I can. Moving on to the exhaust, I wanted to try out some of this AK Interactive True Metal, so I went with a steel and applied this with a brush to the exhaust, the whole exhaust section. Was particularly difficult because of how thin the part was, and it just kept bouncing around all over the place. And once that was all applied, I left it for 30 minutes and then used a cotton bud on my fingers just to buff the surface off and to bring out the shininess. With that complete, I went back to some Vallejo gunmetal grey and put some detail on the radiator and the radiator fan. I started out by painting the actual fan blades themselves. Again, I've sped this up for you. And then I used some Vallejo chrome and did some dry brushing. I did this with a very stiff brush. Dry brushing is a technique whereby you add paint to the brush and then take most of it off again, and the idea is that it just picks out highlights. Now in this case it just picks out the grille of the radiator itself and just gives it a metallic-y look. This worked brilliantly over matte black. And then I fixed the fan cowling onto the radiator itself. And then fitted the whole assembly to the chassis. And then moved on to fitting the actual engine itself to the chassis as well. And these were the various pipes and things that fit to the radiator. I believe here I'm using medium CA glue, which gives you a little bit more time than the standard 4-second glue, just because you've got to manipulate the parts, so it just gives you a little bit more time. Yeah, I'm just dripping some down into those support holes. And then I fitted the exhaust section. Back to some true metal, this time aluminium, and I used this with a brush onto the side exhaust vents. This time I used a softer brush. I used a hard bristle brush last time, and it didn't go on it didn't go on as nice as I'd hoped. So I used a soft bristle brush this time, and it was much better. Again, leave that for 30 minutes to dry off, and then I used a cotton bud to buff the surface to bring out the shine. To be honest, the video does not do it justice. The finish on these true metal paints are fabulous. And then little dabs of glue just to fit it to the chassis itself. And then I used some Vallejo black just on the vents of those exhausts themselves, applied with a little cocktail stick. Now I moved on to the actual assembly of the suspension itself. Sorry for it being off shot there. These are quite fiddly little pieces to fit in, and I kept forgetting about where the camera focus actually was. And then the fitting of these parts to the main chassis assembly. some kind of torsion bar, tension bars, cross arm, something like that, fitting to the engine scoop protector. And then the actual fitting of the engine shield. I'm not sure what it would be called. Whatever that part is, fitting that to the main chassis assembly itself. Again, for all of this, I'm using the 4-second CA glue rather than any contact adhesive because it's all painted with cellulose paint. So. Eagle-eyed among you may notice that I actually had the radiator fitted at a wonky angle. I was able to correct that later. And now this is the assembly of the differential on the rear axle. I actually wish now that I had stripped the chrome off of that cover and sprayed it a silver myself. Now I use some Tamiya paints, some rubber black and some dark iron to put some detail onto the central drive shaft. I use the rubber paint on the gator itself, and then I use some of the dark iron on the universal joint. The main drive shaft was fitted to the differential. And then this was fitted to the main chassis assembly. Some paint onto the shock absorbers. I originally painted these with Vallejo yellow, but it didn't go on very well, so I changed my mind and then went with some Vallejo chrome over the top because that's got the coverage on Vallejo chrome is superb. Now, this was particularly fiddly. It was fitting of the shock absorbers to the rear axle. Instructions on this part weren't quite clear about where they should actually go and what sort of angle they should go at, so I put them how they fell naturally, and luckily it all worked out. So. Some kind of crossbar, sway bar. stabilizer bar or some kind of thing. Again, very fiddly. Trying to get it into those little holes and get the tops lined up and glue it all at the same time. Excuse my head getting shot, but with all the parts being black, it's very difficult, and I had to get quite close to it, so do excuse my bald head. Kind of swing arm type things which went connected to the rear axle as well. Again, the instructions were very difficult on this, so actually the alignment of everything and which order they should go in. So I just really put things as they fell. And then the fitting of the main cockpit assembly to the tops of the chassis. And that's it for the chassis. I hope you enjoyed that. Any comments, any questions, please leave them below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.